The rain came down in sheets so thick that Adelaide Foster could barely see 5 feet in front of her face. But she kept working anyway because the cattle would not wait for better weather, and neither would the mortgage payment that loomed over her family's ranch like a vulture waiting for something to die. Her hands were raw and bleeding from the barbed wire, her cotton dress soaked through until it clung to her skin like a second layer, and the mud sucked at her boots with every step she took along the fence line that separated her father's land from the open range beyond. She had been out here since dawn, and now the afternoon sun was hidden somewhere behind those angry gray clouds that had rolled in from the mountains, turning the Montana landscape into something dark and unforgiving. Adelaide's father had taken ill 3 weeks prior, a fever that would not break no matter what remedies her mother tried, and her younger brother Thomas was only 14, too young and too slight to handle the heavy work that a ranch demanded every single day without fail. So the responsibility fell to her, as it always did when things went wrong, and she accepted it without complaint, because that was what you did when you were 22 years old, and your family needed you, and there was nobody else to turn to in this harsh country where weakness meant death and strength meant survival. The fence post in front of her had rotted clean through at the base, and the wire had come loose, creating a gap wide enough for their cattle to wander through and get lost on the open range or stolen by rustlers who would not think twice about taking what did not belong to them. She had dug out the old post with her bare hands and a rusted shovel, her fingers cramping from the cold rain that had chilled her to the bone. And now she was trying to set the new post in place while simultaneously keeping the wire taut enough to be useful, but not so tight that it would snap. It was impossible work for one person, especially in these conditions. But Adelaide had learned long ago that impossible was just another word for difficult. And difficult was something she could handle if she put her mind to it, and did not let herself think about how much easier things would be if her father was well, or if they had the money to hire proper ranch hands, instead of trying to do everything themselves. She heard the horse before she saw it, the sound of hooves splashing through mud and water, and her first instinct was fear because you never knew who might be riding across your land in weather like this, and what their intentions might be. Her hand went instinctively to the knife she kept at her belt, the only weapon she had brought with her, and she straightened up from her work to face whatever was coming. The rider emerged from the rain like a ghost materializing out of the mist, a tall figure on a bay horse that looked as miserable as Adelaide felt. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat that channeled water off its edges in tiny waterfalls, and a long coat that was probably expensive once, but now looked as waterlogged as everything else in this God-forsaken storm. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than on the ground, and when he got close enough for her to see his face, she noticed he had dark eyes that seemed to take in everything about her situation in a single glance. "That is no work for one person in weather like this," he said, his voice carrying over the sound of the rain without him having to shout. There was something gentle in his tone, despite the roughness that came from years of living outdoors, and Adelaide found herself relaxing slightly even though she knew better than to trust strangers. "It is the work that needs doing," she replied, keeping her voice steady and her hand near her knife. "And I am the only person available to do it." The cowboy looked at the fence, then at her bleeding hands, then back at the fence again. Without a word, he dismounted, looping his horse's reins over a nearby post that was still standing. He was taller than she had thought, broad-shouldered and lean in the way of men who made their living doing hard physical labor, and when he walked toward her through the mud, his movements were purposeful and economical. "I am Bennett O'Connor," he said, tipping his hat to her despite the rain. "And I reckon I can help you finish this job before we both catch our death out here." Adelaide wanted to refuse, because she had been raised to be independent and self-sufficient, and accepting help from strangers went against everything her father had taught her about keeping people at arm's length until you knew their character. But she looked at the fence, at how much work still remained to be done, at her hands that were too numb to grip the wire properly anymore, and she made a practical decision that went against her pride. "Adelaide Foster," she said by way of introduction. "This is my father's land, the Foster Ranch, about 3 miles south of Helena, and I would appreciate the help, Mr. O'Connor, though I cannot pay you for your time." "Did not ask for payment," Bennett said, already moving to take the post from her hands. "Just asked if I could help." They worked together in silence for a while, and Adelaide was surprised at how quickly the job went with 2 pairs of hands instead of 1. Bennett seemed to know exactly what needed to be done without her having to explain, holding the post steady while she packed dirt and rocks around its base, then stretching the wire tight while she hammered staples into the wood to hold it in place. His presence was oddly comforting despite her usual wariness around men she did not know, and she found herself stealing glances at him when she thought he was not looking. He had a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble, and lines around his eyes that suggested he was somewhere in his late 20s, old enough to have seen some of the world but young enough that it had not yet broken him. There was something sad in those eyes, though, a weight that he carried with him, and Adelaide recognized it because she carried a similar weight herself. "You are far from any main roads," she said after they had moved on to the next damaged section of fence. "What brings you out this way in weather like this?" Bennett paused in his work, looking out at the rain-soaked landscape as if trying to decide how much to tell her. "I am between places," he said finally. "Left a job down in Wyoming about a month back, heading north to see if there is work available in Great Falls or one of the mining towns. Figured I would take the scenic route, see some country I have not seen before. And you just happened to ride across my father's land at the exact moment I was struggling with this fence." He looked at her then, and there was the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I heard someone cursing from about half a mile away," he admitted. "Figured whoever it was must be having a pretty bad day, and I've had enough bad days myself to know that sometimes a little help can make all the difference." Adelaide felt her cheeks grow warm despite the cold rain. She had not realized she had been cursing out loud, but she supposed it made sense given how frustrating the work had been. "I apologize for my language," she said stiffly. "No need," Bennett replied, going back to work on the fence. "I have heard worse from cowboys with less cause. Besides, I liked your creativity with those insults. Never heard someone tell a fence post it was the illegitimate offspring of a diseased mule and a tornado before." Despite herself, Adelaide laughed, and the sound surprised her because she could not remember the last time she had found anything funny. The laugh seemed to surprise Bennett too, because he looked up at her with genuine pleasure on his face, as if he had just accomplished something important. They finished the fence repairs as the afternoon wore into evening, and by the time they hammered the last staple into place, the rain had finally begun to ease into a steady drizzle instead of a downpour. Adelaide's whole body ached from the work, but there was satisfaction in seeing the fence line whole and intact again, knowing that the cattle would stay where they belonged, and her father could rest easier when she told him it was done. "Thank you," she said to Bennett, meaning it more than she usually meant such pleasantries. "I would have been out here until full dark if you had not stopped to help." "Happy to do it," he replied, walking back to where his horse stood patiently waiting. The animal was a beautiful creature, well cared for and well trained, which told Adelaide something about the kind of man Bennett was. You could judge a person by how they treated their animals and their word, her father always said, and Bennett's horse looked like it trusted him completely. "Will you come back to the house?" Adelaide heard herself asking before she had fully thought through the invitation. "You are soaked through, and my mother always makes more supper than we can eat. It is the least we can do to repay you for your help." Bennett hesitated, and Adelaide could see him weighing the offer against whatever plans or reservations he had. "I do not want to impose," he said slowly. "You will not be imposing. My mother will be pleased to have another person at the table, and my father will want to thank you himself once I tell him what you did." Something in her voice must have convinced him, because he nodded and swung back up into his saddle. Adelaide untied her own horse, a sturdy mare named Copper who had waded through the fence work with more patience than Adelaide had managed, and together they rode back toward the ranch house through the dripping landscape. The Foster ranch was not grand by any standards, just a simple wooden house with a barn and a few outbuildings, but it was well maintained and solid, built to withstand the harsh Montana winters and the occasionally violent summers. Smoke rose from the chimney, a welcoming sign that promised warmth and food, and as they approached, Adelaide could see her mother moving past the kitchen window. "There is a place for your horse in the barn," Adelaide said, dismounting and leading Copper toward the structure. "Fresh hay and water, and shelter from this weather." They took care of the horses together, another task that went faster with two people, and Adelaide noticed how gentle Bennett was with the animals, speaking softly to them and making sure they were properly dried and fed before seeing to his own comfort. It was another mark in his favor, though she reminded herself that she should not be keeping such a tally in the first place. He was a stranger who would be gone in the morning, nothing more, and she would be foolish to think otherwise. Her mother met them at the door, taking in their bedraggled appearance with the kind of instant assessment that mothers everywhere seemed to possess. Margaret Foster was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she had the kind of presence that made her seem much larger, and her blue eyes missed nothing as they flicked from Adelaide to Bennett and back again. "This is Bennett O'Connor," Adelaide explained quickly. "He helped me finish the fence repairs. I invited him to supper." "Of course you did," her mother said warmly, stepping back to let them enter. "Mr. O'Connor, you are very welcome in our home. Adelaide, get yourself changed into dry clothes before you catch pneumonia." "Mr. O'Connor, I apologize that we do not have any men's clothing that would fit you, but I can hang your coat by the fire to dry while you eat." Bennett removed his hat and coat, revealing a worn but clean shirt underneath. "Thank you kindly, madam. I appreciate your hospitality." "Nonsense. You helped my daughter when she needed it. That makes you a friend to this family." Adelaide excused herself to change, peeling off her soaked dress and pulling on a simple skirt and blouse that were mercifully dry and warm. When she returned to the main room, Bennett was standing awkwardly near the fire, clearly uncomfortable with being a stranger in someone else's home but too polite to show it obviously. Her younger brother Thomas had emerged from wherever he had been hiding and was staring at Bennett with the kind of wide-eyed fascination that teenage boys reserved for cowboys and gunslingers. "Thomas, stop gaping and help me set the table," their mother commanded, and the boy jumped to obey. Dinner was a simple affair of venison stew and fresh bread, but it was hot and filling, and Adelaide watched Bennett eat with the controlled hunger of someone who had missed too many meals on the trail. Her father joined them halfway through, looking pale and weak but determined to meet the man who had helped his daughter. Robert Foster was a proud man, and Adelaide knew It cost him something to be seen in his weakened state by a stranger. "Mr. O'Connor," her father said, his voice rough from the fever that still lingered. "My daughter tells me you stopped your own journey to help her with fence work in the middle of a rainstorm. That speaks well of your character." "Any decent person would have done the same," Bennett replied, though Adelaide noticed he sat a little straighter under her father's scrutiny. "You would be surprised how few decent people there are in this world," her father said dryly. "Where are you headed, son?" "North to Great Falls, sir." "Looking for work as a ranch hand or wrangler." "I have experience with cattle and horses, can do repair work and general labor. Hoping to find a place that needs an extra hand." "What kind of wages are you expecting?" Bennett named a figure that was more than fair but less than he was probably worth based on his skill level. Adelaide saw her father's eyes narrow thoughtfully, and she knew that look. He was calculating, weighing options, making the kind of practical decisions that had kept the ranch running through good times and bad. "We could use the help here," her father said slowly. "With me being sick, Adelaide has been trying to do everything herself, and Thomas is still learning. I cannot pay you much, maybe half what you would make at a larger outfit, but I can offer room and board, and the work would be steady at least through the fall roundup." Adelaide's heart jumped into her throat. The idea of Bennett staying, of having him around for more than just this one evening, created a strange flutter in her chest that she did not want to examine too closely. She looked at Bennett, trying to read his expression, wondering what he would say. Bennett set down his spoon carefully, his gaze moving from her father to her mother to Adelaide herself. "That is a generous offer, sir. Can I think on it tonight and give you an answer in the morning? Of course, you are welcome to sleep in the barn. We have a small room there that we use for hands during busy seasons. It is not fancy, but it is dry and warm." After dinner, Adelaide walked Bennett out to the barn, carrying a lantern to light their way through the darkness. The rain had stopped completely now, and the sky was beginning to clear, revealing stars that glittered like scattered diamonds against the black velvet of the Montana night. "Your family is kind," Bennett said as they crossed the muddy yard. "It has been a while since I sat at a proper table with proper people." "How long have you been wandering?" Adelaide asked, her curiosity getting the better of her manners. "About 2 years, give or take. Had a place in Texas before that, worked as foreman on a big ranch. But things went bad there, and I decided it was time to move on." He did not elaborate on what things went bad meant, and Adelaide did not press. Everyone had secrets, things they did not want to talk about, and she respected his privacy even as she wondered what had driven him away from what sounded like a good position. "Will you take my father's offer?" she heard herself asking as they reached the barn. Bennett turned to look at her, his face half in shadow, half lit by the golden glow of her lantern. "Do you want me to?" The question was direct and honest, and Adelaide found herself unable to look away from his dark eyes. "I think you are a good man," she said carefully, "and we do need the help." My father was not exaggerating about that. Since he got sick, I have been working myself to exhaustion trying to keep up with everything, and Thomas tries, but he is still so young. That is not what I asked. Adelaide took a deep breath. "Yes," she admitted, "I want you to stay. At least for a while." Bennett smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face and made him look younger and less burdened. "Then I will stay," he said simply, "at least for a while." He took the lantern from her hands, his fingers brushing against hers in the exchange, and Adelaide felt that touch all the way down to her toes. It was just a moment, nothing scandalous or even particularly intimate, but it felt significant somehow, like the beginning of something she could not yet name. "Good night, Bennett," she said softly. "Good night, Adelaide." She walked back to the house through the darkness, not needing light to find her way on her own land. And when she glanced back, she could see the warm glow of the lantern through the barn window and the shadow of Bennett moving around inside. Something had changed today, shifted in a way she did not fully understand. And as she lay in bed that night listening to the last drops of rain falling from the eaves, she found herself thinking about dark eyes and gentle hands and the way he had said her name. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed away all the dust and heat, leaving everything feeling fresh and new. Adelaide woke early as she always did, dressing quickly and heading out to start the morning chores before anyone else in the house was stirring. She was surprised to find Bennett already up and working, having apparently let himself into the barn in the pre-dawn darkness to begin feeding and watering the horses. "You are up early," she said, trying not to let him see how pleased she was that he had stayed. "Cowboy hours," he replied with a shrug. "Early to bed, early to rise and all that. Figured I should earn my keep if your father is going to take a chance on hiring me. So you are staying, if the offer still stands, yes." "I thought about it last night, and there are worse places to spend a few months than a small ranch with good people. Besides, I liked the way you cursed at that fence post yesterday. Figured anyone with that much spirit was worth getting to know better." Adelaide felt her cheeks warm, but she could not help smiling. "I will try to be more creative with my cursing in the future, just to keep you entertained." They fell into an easy routine after that, working together on the endless tasks that a ranch demanded. Bennett proved to be everything he had claimed and more, able to handle any job Adelaide threw at him with the kind of competence that came from years of experience. He repaired the barn roof where it had started to leak, mended more fence line, helped Thomas learn how to properly break a young horse to saddle, and even fixed the porch steps that had been sagging for the better part of a year. As the days turned into weeks, Adelaide found herself looking forward to the moments when they would work together, their conversations ranging from the practical to the personal. She learned that he had grown up in Missouri, the son of a farmer who had lost everything in a drought and died of heartbreak shortly after. She learned that he had a sister somewhere in California who he had not seen in 5 years and who might not even know if he was still alive. She learned that he loved the smell of rain on dry earth, and the sound of coyotes singing at night, and the way the mountains looked when the sun first touched their peaks in the morning. In turn, she told him things she had never told anyone else, about how she sometimes felt trapped by the responsibilities that had been placed on her shoulders, about how she loved the ranch but also dreamed of seeing something beyond the Montana horizon, about how she feared that she would never have a life of her own because her family needed her too much for her to ever leave. "You are stronger than you think," Bennett said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "But strength does not mean you have to carry everything alone. That is why people build families and friendships, so they can share the weight." "I have never been good at letting people help me," Adelaide admitted. "I noticed. You have been doing things the hard way your whole life, I think. Maybe it is time to try doing them the easy way for a change." Her father's health improved slowly but steadily, and as he regained his strength, he spent more time observing Bennett work. Adelaide could tell he was impressed by what he saw, and one night over dinner, he made Bennett an offer that surprised everyone at the table. "I am getting older," her father said bluntly, "and this fever showed me that I am not invincible, much as I might like to pretend otherwise. I need help running this place, real help, not just a hired hand who will drift away when the next opportunity comes along. Stay through the winter, Bennett. Stay through next spring and help with the calving season. If at the end of that time you still want to move on, I will not stop you. But if you want to stay longer, if you want to make this place your home, I would be willing to discuss making you a partner in the ranch. A junior partner to start, but with the possibility of more as time goes on. Adelaide saw the shock on Bennett's face, mirroring what she felt herself. Partnership in a ranch was not something offered lightly, and it meant her father saw something special in this cowboy who had ridden out of the rain 2 months ago. "Sir, I do not know what to say," Bennett managed. "Say you will think about it. That is all I ask. But know that this offer comes with my respect and my trust, 2 things I do not give easily." Bennett glanced at Adelaide, and she saw something complex in his expression, a mixture of hope and fear and longing that made her heart ache. "I will think about it," he said quietly. "And I am honored by the offer." That night, Adelaide could not sleep. She kept thinking about what her father's offer meant, about the possibility of Bennett staying not just for a few months but for years, maybe forever. The idea filled her with a joy that was almost frightening in its intensity, because somewhere along the way, without her quite noticing when it happened, she had fallen in love with him. It was not a sudden realization, not a bolt of lightning or a moment of dramatic clarity. It was more like waking up and realizing that the sun had been rising for a while and you had just been too distracted to notice. She loved the way he was patient with Thomas, teaching him things without making him feel stupid. She loved the way he respected her parents, deferring to their experience without being obsequious. She loved the way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, with an expression that suggested he saw something precious that he was afraid to touch for fear of breaking it. Most of all, she loved the way he made her feel, like she was not just the oldest daughter or the ranch worker or the caretaker, but a woman with her own dreams and desires and worth. She got up and dressed, pulling a shawl around her shoulders against the autumn chill, and walked out to the barn where she knew Bennett would be sleeping. The light was still on in the small room he had claimed, visible through the cracks around the door, and she knocked softly before she could lose her nerve. "Adelaide." Bennett's voice was surprised when he opened the door, and she saw that he was fully dressed, sitting at the small table with what looked like a letter half written in front of him. "Is everything all right? I could not sleep," she admitted. "Can we talk?" He stepped back to let her in, and she saw that the room was neat and spare, containing nothing more than a narrow bed, the table and chair, and a trunk that presumably held his belongings. It was the room of someone who was used to traveling light, to not putting down roots or accumulating the kind of possessions that tied you to a place. "I was writing to my sister," Bennett said, nodding at the letter. "Trying to, anyway. I am not very good with words on paper." "You are plenty good with words when you are speaking them," Adelaide said, then bit her lip because that sounded far too forward. Bennett smiled. "That is different. When I am speaking to you, the words just seem to come. But writing them down, trying to explain to someone who has not seen me in 5 years why I am considering staying in Montana instead of pushing on to wherever I was supposed to be going, that is harder." "Are you considering it? Staying, I mean. Taking my father's offer?" He looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face as if trying to read something written there. "That depends," he said finally. "On what?" "On whether you want me to stay. And I do not mean for practical reasons because the ranch needs help or your father needs a partner. I mean for reasons that have nothing to do with work and everything to do with the way I feel when I am near you." Adelaide's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "How do you feel when you are near me?" Bennett took a step closer, then another, until they were standing so close she could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. "Like I have been wandering in the wilderness for years and just found my way home." Like all the mistakes I made and all the bad decisions that brought me to this place were actually leading me exactly where I was supposed to be. Like I could be happy here, truly happy, if you would let me. Bennett, she whispered, not sure what else to say because all the words seemed inadequate for what she was feeling. I love you, Adelaide. I know it is too soon. I know I have no right to say such a thing when I am just a drifter your family took pity on, but it is the truth, and I cannot keep it inside anymore. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you care for your family even when it costs you. I love your laugh and your sharp tongue, and the way you look at the mountains like they hold secrets only you can understand. I love everything about you, and if you do not feel the same way, I will understand and I will still stay and work for your father because I gave my word. But if there is any chance, even the smallest possibility that you might feel something for me too, I need to know. Adelaide reached up and placed her hand against his cheek, feeling the rough stubble and the warmth of his skin. I love you too, she said simply. I have been trying not to, trying to convince myself that you were just passing through and it would be foolish to care. But I do care. I love you, Bennett O'Connor, and I want you to stay. Not for the ranch, not for my father, but for me, for us. He kissed her then, and it was everything a first kiss should be, gentle and passionate and full of promise. Adelaide melted into him, feeling his arms come around her and hold her close, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt truly safe and truly seen and truly loved. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Bennett rested his forehead against hers and let out a shaky laugh. I was not expecting this when I rode across your father's land that day. Neither was I, Adelaide admitted, but I am glad you did. I am glad you stopped to help. I am glad you stayed. I will stay for as long as you want me, forever if you will have me. Forever sounds about right. They talked for hours that night, making plans and sharing dreams, and when Adelaide finally returned to the house as the first light of dawn was breaking over the mountains, she felt like a different person than the one who had left. She was still herself, still strong and stubborn and determined, but now she had something she had not had before. She had hope. Her mother was already up when Adelaide slipped back inside, and one look at her daughter's face told Margaret Foster everything she needed to know. So, she said with a knowing smile, I take it you and Mr. O'Connor had a productive conversation. Adelaide blushed but did not deny it. He is going to stay, Mama, and not just as a ranch hand. He loves me and I love him. Her mother pulled her into a warm embrace. I know, sweetheart. I have known for weeks now. You both have been walking around looking at each other like you hung the moon, and I was beginning to wonder when one of you would work up the courage to say something. Does Papa know? Of course he knows. Why do you think he made that offer of partnership? Your father is many things, but unobservant is not one of them. He saw what was developing between you two and he approved, so he found a way to give Bennett a reason to stay that would not wound his pride or make him feel like charity. Adelaide felt tears prick at her eyes. I love you and Papa so much. We love you too, darling, and we want you to be happy. Bennett is a good man, and if he is the one who makes your heart sing, then we are blessed to have him join our family. The rest of the autumn passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Bennett and Adelaide courted properly, with her parents' blessing, spending Sunday afternoons walking along the creek that ran through the property, or riding out to see the places she had loved since childhood. Bennett was courting her brother's approval too, teaching Thomas how to shoot straight and rope cattle and all the skills a young man needed to know, and Adelaide watched their friendship develop with deep affection. When Bennett finally asked her father for permission to marry her, it was a formality more than a real question, because everyone already knew what the answer would be. They were married in late November in the small church in Helena, with half the town in attendance because news traveled fast in rural Montana, and everyone wanted to see Adelaide Foster marry the mysterious cowboy who had appeared out of a rainstorm. Adelaide wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her taller frame, and she carried wildflowers that Bennett had picked himself from the high meadows. When she walked down the aisle and saw him waiting for her at the altar, looking handsome and nervous in a new suit he had bought specially for the occasion, she felt like her heart might burst from happiness. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, and Adelaide barely heard the rest of the ceremony because she was too busy looking into Bennett's eyes and seeing her whole future reflected there. They said their vows with voices that shook with emotion, promising to love and honor and cherish each other through whatever life might bring. When the minister finally said, "You may kiss your bride," Bennett cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that several of the watching women sighed audibly. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the barn because the weather was too cold to be outside. There was music and dancing and more food than Adelaide had seen in one place in her entire life, everyone in the community contributing something to celebrate the union. Her father gave a speech that made her cry, talking about how he had watched his daughter grow from a determined little girl into a remarkable woman, and how grateful he was that she had found someone worthy of her love. Bennett's speech was simpler, but no less heartfelt. "I was lost before I met Adelaide," he said, his voice carrying through the crowded barn. "Not lost in terms of location, but lost in terms of purpose. I was just drifting, going from place to place without any real direction or goal. And then I heard someone cursing at a fence post in the middle of a rainstorm, and I found everything I did not know I was looking for. Adelaide gave me a home and a family and a future, and I promised to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of those gifts." They spent their wedding night in the small room that Bennett had been occupying, which Adelaide's mother had decorated with candles and flowers to make it more romantic. It was not fancy or grand, but it was theirs, and that was all that mattered. "Are you happy?" Bennett asked as they lay together afterward, Adelaide's head resting on his chest so she could hear his heartbeat. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "I used to think happiness was something other people had, people whose lives were easier or simpler than mine. But now I understand that happiness is not about circumstances. It is about finding the right person to share those circumstances with. You are wise beyond your years, Adelaide O'Connor." She smiled at the sound of her new name. "I am just practical. And practical enough to know that I found something rare and precious when you rode into my life, and I am not letting it go. Good, because I am not going anywhere." Winter settled over Montana with its usual harsh beauty, bringing snow that piled up in drifts higher than a man's head and temperatures that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. But the Foster Ranch, now officially the Foster O'Connor Ranch according to the new papers her father had drawn up, was well prepared and well supplied, and the family settled into the quiet rhythms that winter demanded. Adelaide and Bennett learned to navigate married life with the same patient partnership they had shown during their courtship. They discovered each other's habits and quirks, learning how to share space and decisions and all the little intimacies that came with building a life together. They had their first fight in January, a stupid argument about the proper way to store feed that escalated into something bigger, because they were both stubborn and neither wanted to admit they might be wrong. But they learned how to apologize and compromise, and in some ways, that first fight brought them closer, because it proved they could weather disagreement and come out stronger on the other side. Adelaide's father continued to improve, regaining most of his strength, though he never quite returned to his pre-illness vigor. He was content to let Bennett take on more and more of the ranch management, teaching him the specific quirks and requirements of the land and the cattle. Thomas Hero worshipped Bennett openly now, following him around like a shadow and absorbing everything he could learn. In February, Adelaide realized she was pregnant. She knew before she even confirmed it with the signs her body was showing, because there was a fullness and a rightness to the world that had not been there before. When she told Bennett, he picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests, then set her down carefully as if she had suddenly become fragile. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Adelaide assured him. "How do you know?" "Because I see how you are with Thomas. Because I see how gentle you are with the animals and how patient you are with my father when he is being stubborn about accepting help. Because I know your heart, Bennett O'Connor, and it is big enough to hold all the love a child could ever need." The baby was born in early October, a healthy boy with his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. They named him Robert Thomas O'Connor, after both his grandfather and his uncle, and the family celebrated his arrival with the kind of joy that new life always brings. Bennett held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face. "Hello, little man," he whispered. "I am your papa, and I am going to do everything in my power to give you the kind of life I never had. You are going to grow up knowing you are loved and wanted and valued every single day." Adelaide watched her husband cradle their child and felt her heart overflow. This was what happiness looked like, she thought. Not some abstract concept or distant dream, but this specific moment, this specific man, this specific family they had built together from nothing but hope and hard work and love. The years that followed were not without their challenges. There were droughts that tested their resources and winters that were brutally hard and times when money was tight and worry kept them up at night. But they faced everything together, Adelaide and Bennett, partners in every sense of the word. They added 2 more children to their family, a daughter named Margaret who they called Maggie, and another son they named James. The ranch prospered under their joint management, expanding gradually but steadily, earning a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. Thomas grew into a fine young man, eventually marrying a girl from Helena and starting his own family. Adelaide's father lived to see all his grandchildren born, passing away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68 with his wife and daughter at his bedside. It was a loss that grieved them all deeply. But there was comfort in knowing he had died content, surrounded by the family he loved and on the land he had worked so hard to build. Bennett kept his promise to write to his sister, eventually reconnecting with her and bringing her to visit the ranch with her own family. It was an emotional reunion, years of separation bridged by mutual forgiveness, and the understanding that life had taken them on different paths, but family remained family regardless. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Bennett took Adelaide back to the spot where they had first met, the fence line where she had been working alone in the rain. The fence had been rebuilt since then, newer and stronger, but the location was the same. "You remember that day?" Bennett asked, holding her hand as they looked out over land that was now as much his as hers. "I remember every detail," Adelaide replied. "I remember thinking that my life was hard and lonely and wondering if it would ever be different. And then you appeared out of the rain like an answer to a prayer I had not known how to pray. I was so nervous when I offered to help you. I thought you might tell me to go away, that you did not need anything from a stranger. I almost did. My pride almost got in the way of the best thing that ever happened to me." Bennett pulled her close, kissing her with the same passion and tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every mile I wandered, every mistake I made, every hard lesson I learned. I would do it all again because it led me to you. And I would spend 100 rainy days fighting with fence posts if it meant you would ride into my life and change everything." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the sun set over the mountains that had witnessed the beginning of their story. 3 children played back at the ranch house, waiting for their parents to return. A home full of laughter and love waited for them, built on a foundation of trust and partnership, and the kind of deep affection that only grows stronger with time. Adelaide thought about the girl she had been that rainy day, so determined to do everything herself, so convinced that strength meant never accepting help. She was grateful that Bennett had not listened to that stubborn pride, that he had dismounted and finished the job despite her initial wariness. Because in helping her with that fence, he had helped her with so much more. He had helped her see that true strength was not about standing alone, but about choosing the right person to stand with. "We should head back," Bennett said eventually. "The children will be wondering where we are." "In a minute," Adelaide replied, not quite ready to let go of this moment. "Let me just enjoy this for one more minute." So they stood together as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to appear. 2 people who had found each other against all odds in the wild and beautiful country they called home. And when they finally did walk back to the house, it was hand in hand, their steps perfectly matched, their hearts beating in the same rhythm they had discovered that long-ago day when a cowboy had stopped to help a woman mending fences alone in the rain. The ranch continued to thrive for decades, eventually passing to their children and their children's children, but it always remained the Foster O'Connor Ranch, named for the partnership that had built it into something special. And on rainy days, when the work was hard and the weather was unforgiving, family members would sometimes joke about how Grandma Adelaide used to curse at fence posts until Grandpa Bennett showed up to help, and they would smile at the love story that had started it all. Because that was what it was in the end, Adelaide thought every time she heard the story retold. A love story, not a fairy tale with princes and castles, but something better and more real. A story about 2 people who had been broken by life in different ways, who had found each other in the middle of a storm, and who had chosen every single day to keep choosing each other no matter what challenges came their way. Bennett often said in his later years that the best decision he ever made was to investigate the source of some very creative cursing on a rainy afternoon in Montana. And Adelaide would always reply that the best decision she ever made was to swallow her pride and accept help from a stranger, because that stranger had become her husband, her partner, her best friend, and the love of her life. Their love story became the stuff of family legend, passed down through generations as an example of how life could surprise you when you least expected it. How sometimes the best things came from the worst circumstances, and how true love was not about grand gestures or dramatic moments, but about showing up day after day and choosing to work together through whatever came your way. As Adelaide grew older, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, she never forgot that rainy day or the dark-eyed cowboy who had changed everything. And every anniversary, Bennett would bring her wildflowers from the high meadows, just like he had on their wedding day, and remind her that he loved her more with each passing year. "Still happy?" he would ask, the question becoming a tradition between them. "Still happy," she would always reply. "Today, tomorrow, and forever." And that was the truth. Adelaide Foster O'Connor lived a long, full, rich life, filled with love and laughter and the deep satisfaction that came from building something meaningful. She died at the age of 82, surrounded by her family, with Bennett holding her hand just like he had on so many occasions throughout their life together. She passed peacefully, a smile on her face, her last words a whispered, "I love you," to the man who had been her everything. Bennett followed her less than a year later, unable to bear too long without his Adelaide. He was found one morning in their bedroom, holding a faded photograph of the two of them on their wedding day, that same peaceful smile on his face that Adelaide had worn. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a simple stone that read Adelaide and Bennett O'Connor. Partners in life, partners in love. The ranch remained in the family for generations, each new steward adding their own chapter to the story, while honoring the foundation that Adelaide and Bennett had built. And on the fence line where they had first met, someone had carved their initials into one of the posts, a simple AF. And BO, surrounded by a heart. It weathered and faded over the years, but the family always kept it maintained, a small monument to the moment when two lives had intersected and changed each other forever. Because that was the power of love, the kind of love that Adelaide and Bennett had shared. It did not just affect the two people involved. It rippled outward, touching children and grandchildren, shaping a family, building a legacy that lasted long after the original lovers were gone. It proved that sometimes the most important moments in life were the ones that seemed ordinary at the time. A stranger stopping to help with fence repairs. A simple act of kindness that opened the door to something extraordinary. And somewhere in whatever comes after this life, two souls who had found each other in a Montana rainstorm were together again, still partners, still in love, still choosing each other every day for all of eternity. Because some stories do not end when the people involved die. Some stories live on forever, passed down through generations, a testament to the enduring power of love and the magic that can happen when two people find each other at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right place, and have the courage to open their hearts and let the other person in. Adelaide and Bennett O'Connor's love story was one of those stories. And it all began with a woman mending fences alone in the rain, and a cowboy who dismounted and finished the job.